Marvel just rebooted Steve Rogers' Captain America and introduced a new super soldier. Let's get into it. What's up, my people, and happy 4th to all my fellow Americans here in the States. Yes, there's going to be lots of fireworks and barbecue, but I can't think of a better way to celebrate the red, white, and blue than with a brand new Captain America title, which is exactly what Marvel has just given us. But this isn't just a new Captain America title. This is a full reboot for Steve Rogers' Cap, with Zdarsky at the helm, and it picks up just days after Tony Stark and the Avengers pulled him out of the ice. And like I said, they're also using this new run to introduce a new super soldier named David Colston. So let's light this candle. First of all, the cover of this first issue is just a piece of freaking art by Ben Harvey. He captured that classic patriotic Captain America style perfectly. But when we open the book, we are immediately taken from that bright and hopeful image on the cover to a scene that takes place in New York during one of the darkest days in American history, September 11th, 2001. It's really a brilliant contrast. But the scene is obviously a flashback, and we see a teenage boy standing just outside of Ground Zero as the First World Trade Tower collapses. Then as people are trying to escape the devastation all around him, he just stares in shock at the clouds of debris that's about to overtake him. And as this is all happening, narration begins to tell us, you think you're prepared to see death, but violent death, a man taking a man's life, it's a very different thing. It changes you in ways you know immediately, and ways you discover later in the darkness when you're as alone as you've ever been. And when death happens on a massive scale, you fight the terrible thought that soon comes. Are we worth saving? And if we are, am I willing to become the thing that I hate to save us? Then as we see the young boy's shock turn to tears and anger, he finishes by asking himself, am I willing to be a killer? So right out the gate, this title hits you right in the gut, especially for those of us who lived through 9/11 and remember exactly where we were and what we were doing as those events played out. The fear, anger, and heartbreak we all felt that day is permanently sealed onto our memory. So Zdarsky definitely opened with that to tap into those emotions and set a tone early. Anyway, from there we jump forward in time and are taken to a small New York diner where Cap is sitting at the counter drinking a cup of coffee, while a news report tells us that Tony Stark and his company Stark Tech have revealed a new Stark phone and is moving away from munitions manufacturing entirely. Cap then hears a shots fired call come in over a police officer's radio, and on the next page we are taken to the scene where 3 cops have been hit. Cap, who is wearing a long coat over his suit, walks up and asks one of the wounded officers, where's the shooter? And she tells him that he took her motorcycle and was headed to the UN building. But the thing is, when Cap went into the ice decades ago, there was no United Nations building. So when he has to ask where that is, the officer realizes he's not with the police. At which point Cap loses the coat, revealing who he is, then jumps on a bike while responding, no ma'am, I'm not, but I'm here to help. Cap then speeds off and quickly catches up with the shooter, who is swerving through traffic while screaming for people to move. And as Cap is in pursuit, he wonders to himself if this is just a lone shooter or someone with a plan that's been interrupted. Either way, the shooter sees Cap in the rear view and starts firing on him. Cap is able to shield himself, but he says he's trained, knows how to ride and fire. The perp then starts weaving even more wildly through other vehicles, making it impossible for Steve to get a bead on him. So Cap decides to go high and uses a car like a ramp to get above the traffic, and from the air uses his shield to knock the shooter off his bike. But things then go from bad to worse when Cap sees that the guy is strapped with a bomb, and as the guy falls to the ground, all Cap can do is hope it doesn't explode during impact. Thankfully, they manage to dodge that catastrophe, but Cap still has to jump from his bike and act fast because the shooter quickly gets his bearings and starts firing indiscriminately at civilians. With some quick moves, Cap is able to use his shield once again to protect the civilians, but the shooter then takes off in a sprint, determined to make it to the UN building, saying to himself, don't stop. Even after the UN guards draw their guns and tell him to stop, he continues to tell himself, they let them die. I won't stop. But just before the guards open fire on this guy, Cap arrives and yells for them to hold their fire because he has a bomb. At which point the guards turn and see it's Captain America talking to them, and their jaws drop, with one saying, it can't be. However, Captain America takes control of the situation and starts talking the guy back from the edge by saying, you're military. This surprises the terrorist, and he responds by saying, I was. He then starts to ask Cap how he knew, but Cap just tells him, I know a military man when I see one. Service and rank? The would-be bomber then tells Cap, Army, 2nd Lieutenant, 2 tours in the Gulf. Now at this point, Cap realizes that he's reaching the man and responds by telling him, Captain, Commandos Infantry, World War II. which of course causes the guy to realize exactly who he's talking to, and with a shocked face he says, "That's impossible." Steve then starts relating to him on a much deeper level from here as he tells him, in this world, nothing's impossible. But I'm sure you've seen that, haven't you? Out there, far from home, things you've never wanted to see, never thought possible. But this causes the bomber to start freaking out, and he puts his finger on the detonator as he responds, "Nobody cares. People just live their lives while everyone I know dies for nothing." But just as he's about to hit the button, Cap breaks his train of thought one more time by saying, "Lieutenant, whatever you've gone through, whatever you're thinking you'll accomplish here, it's just not the way. Death brings more death. I can help you, but for now, I'm asking as your superior officer, stand down." The sad and desperate man hesitates for a moment while taking in Cap's words, then drops the detonator and salutes Captain America as he starts to say, my guys." And Cap tells him, "I know, soldier. Now let's shut that thing down, okay?" However, before they have a chance to do anything, the explosive device starts to short out on its own as Iron Man appears saying, "Digital device, remote solutions. Sorry I'm late. Traffic was murder." And he's wearing what looks like his classic Model 2 armor, which is a great ad. Anyway, on the next page, we cut to Captain America and Iron Man looking down from a rooftop across from the UN building as the bomber is being taken away by police. Cap says, "The idea of a United Nations, and you say it's designed to stop future world wars?" Stark responds, "That's a big part of why it was founded, though there's always debate about its efficacy." Cap then says, "Nothing is ever straightforward, is it? But it's nice to see the world has at least tried." That man, though, he felt abandoned by it. By us. However, Stark dodges and replies, "Cap, I know it's only been a week since you came back, but if you're gonna run around fighting, it'd be easier if you did so with the Avengers. Officially." But Cap turns him down, seemingly not for the first time, and tells Tony, "I already belong to an organization, Iron Man. I know it's been decades since I went into the water, into the ice, but for me, it just happened. Yesterday, I was a soldier in the US Army, so now it's time to return to base." From here, we flash back yet again to David Colston, who is sitting outside of an Army recruitment center in Times Square. As narration tells us, the world was changing. We could no longer ignore what was happening across the ocean. Newsreels and newspapers brought the horror to life on our doorstep. And at the same time, we learn that David is refusing to leave until they let him join the Army. But the recruiting officer tells him, "You have severe, persistent asthma. Your vision is 20/60. And frankly, you look like a strong wind would snap you in two. I'm sorry, son. I really am. It's honorable that you want to serve your country, but you need to find other ways." Then, as narration continues saying, "The suffering, the inhumanity. If I wouldn't turn my back on a neighbor in need, how could I turn my back when other nations were on fire?" Followed by David responding to the recruiting officer by telling him, "I understand, sir, but this is all I think about anymore. That the world has gone mad and good, sane men are the only cure." And while David is saying this, we see that the commanding officer at the recruitment center is listening from inside the building and is impressed by his conviction. But after this, we are taken to the Pentagon, where Steve Rogers is being put through a series of tests and exercises in order to sort out whether he really is who he says he is. And after the scientists conclude that all indicators suggest Steve is the real deal, we see General Thaddeus Ross enter the simulation room and introduce himself to Steve, saying, "I've read your debrief already, soldier, but we're gonna have more questions." Steve stands at attention and responds, "Yes, sir. I'd expect nothing less." Ross then continues, "Number one among them is this. Why are you here, soldier? Why walk into the Pentagon, a place that didn't exist when you were last roaming this planet? From what we can tell, that maladjusted crew funded by Tony Stark seems only eager to have you. It's a new world. The war is long over, and you could go anywhere you wished. So again, why here?" We then see the memories of what happened to Steve just before he went into the ice replay in Steve's mind as he tells the general, "It's been a heck of a week, sir. I've seen some amazing things, but you've read my debrief. I've lost everything. My partner, Bucky, James Buchanan Barnes, I watched him die before I fell into the ocean. My parents were dead before I enlisted, and any friends I once had, they're all gone. The only thing that mattered to me that still exists, still does what I need it to, that can make sense of this world, is here with the men and women who serve." This causes General Ross to smile as he responds, "I understand, more than you know. Captain Steve Rogers, welcome back to the United States Armed Forces. When you're ready, soldier, I believe I have your first mission." From here, we flash back yet again as we see that David's speech at the Army Recruitment Center was effective as they pushed him through and he's now in boot camp. However, through a phone conversation with his mother, we learn that not only does she not want him there, but that her other other son, Brian, David's brother, had already been killed in the war. We also see his fellow recruits bullying him relentlessly, but David never backs down, which catches the attention of his commanding officer, who clearly takes note of this weak kid with an unbreakable fighting spirit. However, on the next page, we jump back to the present, where we find the Fantastic Four struggling against Mole Man and his giant mech monster. But Captain America suddenly arrives and puts an end to the battle by pulling Mole Man away from his controls. He then says, "I believe this gentleman is the source of your problems. Happy to stick around and help with the cleanup, but afterward, I was hoping to have a conversation with Mr. Fantastic." As Reed and Sue just look at him in shock. We then cut to Reed and Steve sitting at a bar discussing that first mission that General Ross was telling Steve about, which turns out to involve Dr. Doom. Reed begins to tell Steve what he knows about Doom, followed by Steve saying, "Doom's an autocratic madman who's been illegally entering America and threatening its citizens after his coup in Latveria. He's destroyed the US Embassy there and taken our diplomats prisoner before the majority had a chance to flee. We're putting together a covert strike force to go in and retrieve them before it's too late." Reed then responds by saying, "Of course, the Fantastic Four will join you." But Cap tells him, "You can't. A lot's changed from when I was first around. It appears that America has the new atomic bomb, and it has you. You and your super friends. The world is watching, scared. The UN is voting on a resolution banning extra-powered beings from military operations on foreign soil." This obviously frustrates Reed, and he starts to ask Cap how he's able to go. And Steve tells him, "My heavily documented wartime service has apparently created a goodwill exception for enhanced military. No country is willing to halt their super soldier programs, but giant men made of rock are an international no-go now." But this leaves Reed confused about why Captain America wanted to meet with him in the first place. So Steve tells him, "I have information, facts, details, but what I really need to know is, who is the man I'm going up against? 2 weeks ago, I was fighting Adolf Hitler. Now, suddenly, I'm in a brand new world and wondering, is this fate? Am I here to stop the next Hitler before he starts?" But just as Reed begins to reassure Cap that Doom is not Hitler, a drunk guy walks up from the bar wanting a picture with Mr. Fantastic. So the two men leave the pub, and as they're walking and talking, Cap asks Reed how he can stop Doom. So Reed tells him that ego is his undoing, but the armor, the mask, those boost it to the nth degree. "I've been working on a way to shut down the armor, but I haven't been able to test it yet. I could set you up with it, Captain." Cap then asks Reed to call him Steve, at which point Reed responds, "I know it's only been a couple of weeks for you being back, but my father, well, he worshipped you as I was growing up, and so did I." As he pulls out a Captain America action figure he's had since he was 8 years old. He then continues to say, "I'm sorry, Captain America, but you're a living legend. Myself and so many others grew up with you. You're the counter to the stories of the boogeymen from our childhoods. You're the brave man, the one who helps, who fights evil wherever it lives. I'm incredibly sorry for all you've lost, but I'm so glad you're here again. The world needs you." Now, this obviously leaves Cap incredibly humbled, and all he can say is to ask whether they made a figure of Bucky too. And as they look out at the Statue of Liberty, Reed replies, "You're darn right they did." We are then taken back to David Colston on the army base, who is laying in bed reading a book of Captain America's notes from when he was serving in World War II. He then realizes that his drill sergeant is standing there staring at him, and just as he started to explain, the sergeant rips him out of his bed and throws him outside into the rain and the mud while calling him a mistake and an embarrassment. The sergeant then proceeds to beat the life out of the kid while telling him, "You're a weak crybaby and you'll be a deficit in the battlefield," which infuriates David, and with blood pouring from his mouth and his nose, he turns and says, "I'm not crying, and I'm not leaving," followed by standing to his feet and raising his fists to fight. However, the Sarge just continues to land blow after blow until he finally knocks David out completely. But through it all, even as his fellow recruits watched, David Colston refused to leave. So clearly, this kid's story is almost a mirror image of Steve Rogers, which will make for an interesting dynamic when the two finally meet. In fact, over the next couple pages, we see Captain America walking through a museum and wrestling with this new living legend role he's been thrown into, and whether or not it might change him for the worse. Immediately followed by David in a hospital bed reaching for his inhaler when his commanding officer hands it to him and says, "It must be tiring being so feeble. Your soul, your spirit wanting more, your body saying no. But you didn't stay down. It's just not in you, is it? So what if I told you, Mr. David Colston, the weakest recruit I've ever witnessed, that I could cure that asthma?" Which immediately gets David's attention and obviously is the turning point toward him becoming a super soldier. Anyway, as the first issue comes to a close, we see Steve Rogers walk into General Ross's office with Ross saying, "Sorry to call you in so soon, but our last spy in Latveria has gone dark. We have to pray that the Doomstat infiltration point he gave us still works." Cap responds by saying, prayer goes a long way if the planning is solid. Do we know where the hostages are being held? And at the same time, we get the reveal of a brand new suit for Captain America that no longer bears the stars and stripes. In fact, it kind of looks like he has an asterisk on his chest, so I'm not sure if I like it or not. Regardless, his reasoning for changing the suit, which is to prevent himself from getting lost in the symbol the world has built his original suit into, is right on point with Captain America as a hero. Just like Superman, Steve Rogers always strives to do what is right for its own sake, not for what he might get from it. So while the suit change will likely be temporary, it's a cool angle to explore Cap as a character. Anyway, General Ross goes on to tell Steve there are 3 points within the city that we've identified as possibilities. The only man who says he knows the location for sure is Marius Wolf, the head of the Latverian resistance. He's located in the Northeast District in a safe house and is willing to help. Cap notes, if he's still alive, to which Ross replies, if anyone's still alive. We haven't heard any demands for the hostages. There's been no communication with Doom since the embassy attack. Cap then asks, how small is our entry team? But they're interrupted by one of the members of his team who says, it ain't the size of your entry team, it's how you use them. And on the next page, we meet Cap's teammates, Terry Chill Mendoza, who is clearly excited to meet Steve, and Julie Slate, who is not so impressed. But Ross then introduces them saying, Cap, this is Julie Slate, marksman for SEAL Team X, the Howling Commandos. Which obviously gets Cap's attention, and he says to her, Howling Commandos? Big name to live up to, soldier. To which she sarcastically replies, we're Marines, soldier, graciously letting an Army fossil join us. But Cap doesn't bite and just tells her, no offense meant, just getting the lay of the land. Followed by asking, so we're a 3-person team? Then at that moment, a 4th member of the team walks in wearing a shield just like Captain America's while saying, no sir, we are not. Then on the final page of the issue, we are taken to Baghdad during the Iraq War, where we finally see David Colston as a shield-carrying super soldier, standing with his fellow soldiers as they watch the statue of Saddam Hussein being torn down. All while captions say, so I went out into the world to answer the question, can I stop the bullies? Can Captain America make the world a better place? And with that, the issue ends. I gotta tell you, I absolutely loved everything about this issue and how writer Chip Zdarsky shaped the opening of this new era for Captain America. And the setup for Cap's first mission, where he will be meeting and facing off with Victor Von Doom for the first time, has me ready for issue 2. Not to mention the fact that at the end of this issue, they essentially just introduced a new Howling Commandos team, which includes this new super soldier David Colston, who has a very similar backstory to Steve's. The question is, how has David's experiences in the Iraq War shaped him? And is he someone Cap can trust when they get into Latveria? We don't know yet, but I can tell you that we'll be right back here to talk about what happens next in issue 2 when it drops next month. In the meantime, jump into the comments and let us know what you thought about the first issue of this Captain America reboot. Otherwise, have a safe and happy 4th, and we will see you next time when we give you everything you need to know about Guy Gardner Green Lantern before heading into the Superman movie.